point as the U.S. House is about to gavel in for legislative business this afternoon. The health care hearing will continue on our companion network, C-SPAN 3, and online at cspan.org. Live now as the House is set to consider a bill dealing with bank regulations and a final passage vote on a resolution disapproving of the debt limit increase passed by Congress on October 16th.
The House will be in order. The prayer will be offered by our chaplain, Father Conroy.
Let us pray. Eternal God, we give you thanks for giving us another day. Once again, we come to ask wisdom, patience, and peace and understanding from the members of this people's house. On this day, we ask your blessing on the men and women, citizens all, whose votes have populated this people's house. Each member of this house has been given the sacred duty of representing them. Today we mourn the loss of former Congressman Ike Skelton, a true public servant and staunch supporter of our military. May he and his family find solace and peace at this time. Bring each of us at last to that place where our hearts will rest in you. Bless us this day and every day, and may all that is done within the people's house this day be for your greater honor and glory. Amen.
The Chair has examined the journal of the last day's proceedings and announces to the House his approval thereof. Pursuant to Clause 1 of Rule 1, the journal stands approved. The Pledge of Allegiance will be led by the gentleman from Oklahoma, Mr. Langford.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
The Chair will entertain up to 15 requests for 1-minute speeches on each side of the aisle. What purpose does the gentlelady from North Carolina seek recognition?
I request unanimous consent to address the House for 1 minute, Mr. Speaker.
Gentlelady from North Carolina is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. In 2009, President Obama made a promise his administration had no intention of keeping. If you like your doctor, you will be able to keep your doctor, period. If you like your health plan, you'll be able to keep your health care plan, period. No one will take it away, no matter what, end quote. Today's Washington Post bestows upon this moment of rhetorical splendor and others like it 4 Pinocchios for the grievousness and frequency of their airing. It turns out, by design, the Affordable Care Act is diminishing private health insurance plans, particularly in the individual market. The Post concludes the President's promise apparently came with a very large caveat. If you like your health care plan, you'll be able to keep your health care plan if we deem it to be adequate. For millions, Washington has deemed their personal health care preferences deficient, and come January, they won't have access to the plans they had before. Americans deserve better. I yield back.
What purpose does the gentlelady from Arizona seek recognition? Gentlelady is recognized for 1 minute.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. October is Domestic Violence Awareness Month. My first real job back in 1993 was at a domestic violence shelter. I was in college studying to become a social worker. And during my time at the shelter, I helped women and children at our shelter escape the cycle of abuse. Some women came through our doors again and again before finally getting free. That's why I worked hard to pass the Violence Against Women Act for these very families. Yet too often, women in our country escape their abusers for only a short time. Some abusers track down women and children in order to keep the cycle of abuse going. But VAWA helps these families stay safe from their abusers, like Jane, who lives in Phoenix with her 3 kids. Jane and her kids fled their home state and moved to Arizona to escape their abuser. He'd been chasing Jane and the kids for years, following them from home to shelter to their next home. Jane couldn't get away from him. But when she came to Arizona, Arizona's address confidentiality program provided her with an alternative address to use legally instead of her real address. It prevented her abuser from finding her. Thanks to VAWA, Jane is safe. Mr. Speaker, I hope we'll all double down to end domestic violence in this country. Thank you.
The gentlelady's time has expired. What purpose does the gentleman from Virginia seek recognition? The gentleman from Virginia is recognized.
Mr. Speaker, I rise today to honor the memory and the spirit of a true community leader, Ruth Herring. Ruth served as the editor and publisher of the King George Journal in King George County, Virginia. Ruth passed away on Saturday, October 12th at the age of 87 after decades of service to her community. Ruth was indomitable, in the words of her daughter Jessica, and always wanted to promote things that were positive for the community. The communities in and around King George County and our great Commonwealth of Virginia have lost an eminent spirit that connected and energized those around her. Ruth's daughter Jessica will assume her mother's duties at the King George Journal and no doubt has a difficult yet wonderful challenge ahead of her to continue in the spirit of Ruth's intentions for the community. My condolences extend to Ruth's family and the entire community of King George County. To truly honor Ruth, we can all learn from her example and her passion to truly improve her community and the lives of those around her. With that, Mr. Speaker, I yield back.
The gentleman yields back his time. What purpose does the gentlelady from Illinois seek recognition? The gentlelady from Illinois is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. As we prepare for the district work period, I urge my colleagues to dial down the partisan rhetoric that shut down our government and take the time to listen to the folks you came to Washington to represent. Americans have been saying they want us to do all we can to protect the economy and support American jobs, not threaten them. This week, I introduced H.R. 3327, the Veterans Work Opportunity Act, and H.R. 3328, the American Work Opportunity Act, which aim to get more veterans and unemployed Americans back to work by offering tax credits to businesses who will hire them. Next week, I'll be meeting with small business owners, manufacturers, and constituents around my district as part of my 2nd Congressional District Economic Development Tour. Here we'll discuss what Congress can do to support our communities and grow American jobs. The family businesses I represent in Kankakee and the manufacturers I represent in Chicago both say the same thing. Business as usual in Washington doesn't help business back home. I couldn't agree more. I urge my colleagues to co-sponsor H.R. 3327 and H.R. 3328 and work civilly to get our economy back on track. Thank you.
Gentlelady's time has expired. What purpose does the gentleman from Oklahoma seek recognition?
Seek unanimous consent from the House to speak for 1 minute and to revise and extend my remarks.
The gentleman from Oklahoma is recognized.
Mr. Speaker, the Obamacare website has been a nuisance. People spend hours of wasted time trying to get on it, trying to get information they cannot get information on. But this has moved far beyond just a nuisance of trying to get on a website. Now people are discovering the real cost increases that are happening, and over 1 million people have already received a cancellation notice for their insurance. Let me just give you a couple of those from my district. The Evans Law Firm has 17 people involved in their small law firm. That firm received a cancellation notice, not because their insurance was not up to the standards that the President has set, but because it grouped together with other policies, and now that's no longer going to be available to them. So they have to go out on the market. The cheapest they have found so far is a 25% increase to them. Another business owner has notified me they're going to pay 13.5% increase in their insurance next year because their current insurance doesn't have pediatric care in it. None of the employees there have children, so of course they haven't had insurance for pediatric care. This would be the equivalent of having a car in your driveway and the next morning waking up the next morning and some government official has switched the car to a better car and you get the bill for the more expensive car because they didn't like your car. This does not help the families at home. With that, I yield back.
Gentleman's time has expired. What purpose does the gentlelady from Texas seek recognition? Gentlelady from Texas is recognized.
I am very pleased to have heard some of the testimony of Secretary Sebelius and to understand that we should be in this business, all of us, in serving the American public to fix problems and make, in essence, things work. Put the wheels on. And so we are going to ensure that this website is fixed by the end of November, the beginning of December. Same kind of problems that happened with Medicare Part D. But in actuality, rather than using anecdotal stories, let me tell you that the President was in fact right, that you can grandfather and keep your same insurance. But if your same medical insurance was similar to a subprime mortgage loan that had no value whatsoever, as most Americans know, and you are getting an improved medical coverage insurance, then you get new insurance. And as in California and other places that states have their own insurance exchange, we've seen a 29% decrease in insurance premiums. But the real issue is what we're doing in sequester and budgeting and the loss of the researchers at the NIH. It is a disgrace. We need to get to work on serious issues so that we can put this country back to work. I yield back.
Lady's time has expired. What purpose does the gentleman from Ohio seek recognition?
Remarks.
The gentleman from Ohio is recognized.
Mr. Speaker, October is Domestic Violence Awareness Month, and as a former prosecutor, I believe we should do everything in our power to raise the awareness of domestic violence and to protect and empower the victims of these crimes. In the 7 counties I represent in Northeast Ohio, over 1,500 people sought shelter last year to escape domestic violence. Sadly, some of them were children. For these women and children, it's crucial that we in Congress pass laws to protect them. That was why I was one of the first supporters of the Violence Against Women Act earlier this year. It's a bill that provides critical services for victims of violence and provides law enforcement officials the resources to better protect and assist them. Together, we must stand up against domestic violence and enforce a zero-tolerance policy, both here in Washington and at home in our communities. I thank my colleagues for joining me in this bipartisan effort to raise the awareness of this important issue, and I yield back the rest of my time.
The gentleman yields back his time. What purpose does the gentleman from California seek recognition?
To address the House floor for 1 minute and to revise and extend my remarks.
The gentleman from California is recognized.
Mr. Speaker, I rise today in solemn recognition of October as Domestic Violence Awareness Month. While we've made great strides in fighting domestic violence, we still have a long way to go. Over 1/3 of women have experienced rape, violence, or stalking by an intimate partner in their lifetime. As a former prosecutor who has worked with hundreds of women victims of domestic violence, I know that holding their batterer responsible is important to them, but almost more important is making sure that we have the victim services necessary after the batterer is held responsible, and that is more important for their pathway to healing. I was proud to support the Violence Against Women Act reauthorization, and back home in the East Bay, we're fortunate to have places for women to go for those victim services. For example, Ruby's Place in Hayward, California, is a shelter helping hundreds of domestic violence survivors. I visited Ruby's Place in April. I saw the care, compassion, and concern that the employees there showed to women and families who are desperately in need of assistance. Shelters like Ruby's Place provide a lifeline to women across the country, and those places count on the federal government to help them. Hopefully, recognizing October as Domestic Violence Awareness Month is one important step to helping places like Ruby's Place.
Time has expired. What purpose does the gentleman from Missouri seek recognition? Gentleman is recognized.
Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, today the Secretary of Health and Human Services said to Americans that we deserve better than what we have gotten with Obamacare. America sure does deserve better. This is the first time in the history of our country that American citizens have been forced to purchase a product that they do not want and which they cannot afford on a website that does not work. But let me say, it's not just Obamacare, the Obamacare website, that is broken. President Obama has repeatedly told American families, if you like your current health insurance, you can keep your coverage. Just this week, it was revealed that President Obama and his staff have known for over 3 years that millions of Americans will lose their current health insurance because of Obamacare. Furthermore, families in my district and across the country are feeling the sticker shock from soaring premiums. They are seeing reduced benefits, and they are being forced to make difficult financial decisions. Mr. Speaker, my constituents and families across America do indeed deserve better.
What purpose does the gentleman from New York seek recognition? The gentleman from New York is recognized.
Mr. Speaker, later today the House of Representatives will vote on legislation that would reject the debt ceiling increase that was passed by Congress earlier this month. This vote makes no sense. Make no mistake, voting to reject the debt ceiling increase is a vote to default. And these are the same members who just a couple of weeks ago decried the notion of America defaulting on its obligations and voted earlier this year for a budget resolution that spends $700 billion more than it takes in revenues. The logical consequence of this action is to raise the debt ceiling. Mr. Speaker, to achieve growth, the American economy needs stability and certainty, not fake votes that put politics ahead of the American people. Let's end this nonsense and get back to the work of creating jobs and nation building right here in America. I yield back the balance of my time.
Gentleman yields back his time. What purpose does the gentleman from Texas seek recognition? Gentleman from Texas is recognized.
Mr. Speaker, folks back home are frustrated, confused, and quite frankly scared about this disastrous health care law. Last week, Stephen from Plano sent me an email sharing his first-hand experience with the Marketplace Exchange. In short, operators on the 1-800 line had no answers to his questions. They simply reiterated he should wait until later that evening or the next day to apply since the systems were having technical issues. Unfortunately, the problems go far beyond an unworkable website. Even with 3 years of preparation and spending more than $1 billion taxpayer dollars, Obamacare has failed to give the American people what they were promised. Mr. Speaker, the American people were promised affordable health care, not for a select few, but for all. Now, more than ever, we must work together to delay this law. Americans want, need, and deserve better. Yield back.
Gentleman yields back his time. What purpose does the gentleman from California seek recognition? Gentleman from California is recognized.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. You know, the healthcare.gov website, the glitches are truly unacceptable, and they must be fixed as quickly as possible. However, the majority party is not talking about fixing the website. They are fixated on criticizing the Affordable Care Act instead of helping the American public understand the act and receive the benefits of true affordable care. Countless hours in committees, over 40 votes to repeal and delay, millions of taxpayer dollars have been spent on delaying, defunding, and undermining this law. Throwing sticks into the spokes of the law will not help to make it better. I urge my colleagues to stop the obstruction and to be part of the solution. Thank you, and I yield back the balance of my time.
The gentleman yields back his time. What purpose does the gentleman from Wisconsin seek recognition?
Address the House for 1 minute and revise and extend my remarks.
The gentleman from Wisconsin is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Last week, Egyptian gunmen attacked a wedding at the Coptic Christian Church of the Virgin Mary, killing 4 and wounding many others. Among those killed were 2 young girls, a 12-year-old and an 8-year-old. And as a father of 6, I can't imagine the horror and pain of those families having to bury their 2 young children. We have to ask, what was their offense? What was their crime, this 12-year-old and this 8-year-old? Their crime was, their offense was, that they were practicing their faith, that they were Christians. Mr. Speaker, in the coming weeks, Secretary John Kerry is going to be visiting Egypt. I call on Secretary Kerry to highlight during his visit the religious freedom abuses that have been occurring throughout Egypt. The U.S. Commission on International Religious Freedom has already named Egypt as a country of particular concern for religious freedom violations. And I call on every member of this House to stand up on those who are attacking Christians around the world. It's our duty to stand with those who are being abused for practicing their faith. With that, I yield back.
Gentleman's time has expired. What purpose does the gentleman from Minnesota seek recognition? The gentleman from Minnesota is recognized.
Mr. Speaker, I rise today to offer my congratulations to the Minnesota Lynx basketball team. We're so proud that they, for the second time in 3 years, won the 2013 Women's National Basketball Association Championship. You know, they swept the playoffs, winning every game decisively, and I was glad that ESPN broadcast the finals so that everyone could see Olympian Maya Moore sink some beautiful three-point shots. She was joined by with her outstanding play by 2 other gold medal winning Olympians, Simone Augustus and Lindsay Whalen. Former golfer Janelle McCarville took a no-look behind-the-back pass between her legs, backwards bounce pass, assist, and were 2 of the most exciting plays of the season. You know, I'm proud of the Minnesota Lynx, but I'm even more proud of Title IX, 1973. This country came to make sure of equality for women in education, and that includes sports. And the result is women in athletics that are amazing and entertaining. And I congratulate the Lynx.
Gentleman's time has expired. What purpose does the gentleman from Michigan seek recognition? The gentleman is recognized for 1 minute.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I rise today to say thank you to a friend of mine, Mayor James R. Buck, who's dedicated 45 years of service to the city of Granville in the 2nd District, and the last 29 he served as mayor. Mayor Buck has been recognized countless times for his leadership and commitment to West Michigan. Most recently, he received the Michigan Municipal League Michael A. Guido Leadership and Public Service Award. In addition to his role as mayor, Jim serves as the chairman of the Grand Valley Metro Council, which plays a leading role in fostering public and private cooperation to enhance quality of life in West Michigan. Under the steady leadership of Mayor Buck, Granville has grown and thrived. Granville would not be the city it is today without Jim, and his impact will be felt forever and be recognized by all. I want to personally thank my friend Jim Buck for his dedication and service to our community. Your long days and hard hours, you've put Granville on the map as a destination to do business, visit, and most importantly, live. Mayor Buck, thank you for what you have done not only for Granville, not only for West Michigan, but for all of Michigan and our country, and enjoy the time off. Thanks, Jim.
Gentleman's time has expired. What purpose does the gentlelady from Texas seek recognition?
To address the House for 1 minute.
Gentlelady is recognized for 1 minute.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I rise today to express my strong support for the Patient Protection and Affordable Care Act. In the past, no group has been affected more negatively than the rise in health costs for seniors. Because of the Affordable Care Act, some of the financial burdens have been alleviated. The Affordable Care Act has already helped to close the Medicare Part D donut hole by saving 6.6 million seniors more than $7 billion on prescription drugs. It also provides a free annual wellness visit and coverage for key preventive services that many seniors avoid because of the high cost. As for waste and fraud in Medicare, Affordable Care Act strengthens the system and gives more effective tools to identify and remove the unnecessary costs. The CARE Act not only provides essential quality care, it does so while lowering costs for our aging population. I'm proud to stand with my colleagues and the President to support the Affordable Care Act. Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I yield back.
Gentlelady yields back her time. What purpose does the gentleman from Maryland seek recognition? The gentleman from Maryland is recognized.
Mr. Speaker, the train wreck of the President's health care plan continues. The President promised that, quote, if you like your plan, you can keep it, period. But millions of Americans are getting cancellation letters this month. Mia from Taneytown in Carroll County wrote my office saying, quote, I recently became aware that my insurance will terminate the plan I currently participate in. I was told to find another insurance plan that fits my budget and needs. Problem is, none of the insurance carriers can compare to the quality and cost of my current insurance. However, I'm being told that I am being forced by law to pick a new plan, or else I will be penalized by the U.S. government. I've never been more disgusted with my government than I am now. My husband and I work very hard for the money we have. We have a daughter who's 8 months old, but my premium cost to cover myself and her will almost triple. How is this affordable? It's hard enough to pay a mortgage, gas, and day-to-day living. Mr. Speaker, the President misled the American people. Mia lost her plan and her insurance cost tripled. Americans deserve better. I yield back.
Gentleman yields back his time. What purpose does the gentleman from North Carolina seek recognition?
Unanimous consent to address the House for 1 minute.
Gentleman from North Carolina is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I rise to celebrate the passage of H.R. 2189, a bipartisan bill that will finally recognize the valiant service of merchant mariners that operated domestically during World War II. It has been my honor for the past 3 Congresses to introduce legislation that would recognize these brave Americans and correct an injustice that has remained for over 70 years. I would like to congratulate a wonderful North Carolinian, Mr. Don Horton, who has been the driving force behind my legislative effort for the past 3 Congresses. Tragically, Don's commitment to this legislation was due to the loss of his brother, William Lee Horton, Jr., on 31 March 1942 as a result of a German U-boat attack on his tugboat off the coast of Virginia. Many in the Horton family served on these tugboats and barges during World War II in support of the war. Don Horton has become the foremost expert on this forgotten segment of World War II and has worked tirelessly to see mariners like his brother gain the recognition as veterans that they rightly deserved and earned through service to their country. Finally, Mr. Speaker, after 70 long years, these mariners have a chance to receive the recognition they deserve for their service to our country. I implore my colleagues in the Senate to consider this legislation as quickly as possible and support passage. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I yield back.
Gentleman yields back his time. What purpose does the gentleman from Kansas seek recognition?
Mr. Speaker, to address the House for 1 minute and to revise and extend my remarks.
Gentleman from Kansas is recognized.
Mr. Speaker, the American people are looking for results from Washington, D.C. Even though we have a divided government, I still believe we can and must work together to solve the many challenges facing our great nation. More than anything, we must work together in the coming months to help put more Americans back to work and kickstart our sluggish economy. We can work together to reform our tax code and make it simpler and easier to understand and comply with. We can work together to build a national energy policy that safely utilizes all of America's resources, putting people to work, keeping energy costs down. We can work together to support education, research, infrastructure, immigration reform, yes, and even pass the Farm Bill. We can work together to reform important programs like Medicare or Social Security so that we can preserve and protect them for the future generations while balancing our budget and controlling spending. Mr. Speaker, today our economy may be stagnant, but our optimism and determination have never been greater. Let's work together to renew the prosperity and opportunity for all Americans in our great nation. I yield back.
Gentleman yields back his time. What purpose does the gentleman from California seek recognition?
Speaker, I ask for unanimous consent to address the House for 1 minute and to revise and extend my remarks.
Gentleman from California is recognized.
Mr. Speaker, October is Domestic Violence Awareness Month. Unconscionably, domestic violence has reached pandemic proportions, affecting 1 out of every 3 women in the United States. As an emergency medicine doctor, I have witnessed firsthand the devastating effects of domestic violence. I have treated the beaten and bruised bodies of countless women who were victims of domestic violence, and I have been inspired by their unbroken spirits. I am proud of the work many are doing to prevent domestic violence and to keep women safe throughout my district and our country, like Shelter from the Storm in the Coachella Valley. Domestic violence is a leading threat for women. On average, 4 women are murdered by their intimate partner every day in the United States. A woman is battered in the U.S. every 15 seconds. That equals 240 domestic violence episodes in 1 hour. No woman should ever suffer domestic violence, and those who are victimized should know they have access to the care and services they need to seek justice. We must continue to work together to take steps to prevent domestic violence, stand up for those who are victims, and hold perpetrators accountable to the full extent of the laws. And to my patients and women victims across the country and in my district, please,
Gentleman's time has expired. What purpose
up.
does the gentleman from North Carolina seek recognition? Gentleman from North Carolina is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I rise today having come from a hearing in which we heard about some of the issues with Veterans Affairs. $762,000 spent on a conference while our veterans had to wait for their disability claims to be processed in my home state of North Carolina. The delay is unacceptable, Mr. Speaker. We are having families that are having to wait almost 2 years to have their claims processed. This is unacceptable. And if it were just an extravagant conference, we could overlook it. But yet a senior official in an email says, well, bottom line, you don't have to worry about a thing. Mr. Speaker, it has come to the time where we can tell our veterans when they don't have to worry about a single thing, where their claims are processed, and where we truly keep our commitment to our veterans. With that, I yield back, Mr. Speaker.
Gentleman yields back his time. What purpose does the gentlelady from California seek recognition? Gentlelady from California is recognized.
More than 2.5 million Americans have served our country in Iraq and Afghanistan. They placed themselves in harm's way so we could live safely at home. The benefits veterans receive for their service hardly repays them for the sacrifices that they've made. Nonetheless, they need the help. This is why we must ensure veterans can access every benefit they've earned. Benefits like educational counseling. While the VA does a great job providing vocational rehab, many veterans aren't aware of the educational counseling they are entitled to as part of their GI Bill benefits. That's why I'm introducing the Veterans Education Counseling Act. It directs the VA to differentiate between these two benefits and makes the application process available online. This helps every veteran make the right choice for their lives and their future. I encourage all of my colleagues to join me in passing this bill.
Gentlelady yields back her time. What purpose does the gentleman from North Carolina seek recognition? Gentleman from North Carolina is recognized.
Mr. Speaker, much attention has been focused recently on the flawed rollout of Obamacare. Sadly, a potential bigger problem has now emerged. Once consumers battle their way through the glitchy website, much of the highly sensitive personal information sent to the insurers is wrong. According to the Washington Post and Wall Street Journal, the Obamacare website is sending garbled data to insurers, claiming, for example, that some enrollees have 3 spouses, or that someone has signed up for 3 separate insurance plans, or has enrolled, then unenrolled, then re-enrolled multiple times in one day. In short, you could fight your way through the website, fill out all the forms correctly, and end up with the wrong insurance, wrong subsidy, and the wrong coverage. Now's the time to end this madness. The individual mandate must be delayed by a year, and President Obama and Senator Reid must be willing to sit down with Republicans and discuss real reforms that what is quickly becoming a national disaster. Thank you. I yield back.
Gentleman yields back his time. What purpose does the gentlelady from Ohio seek recognition?
1 minute.
Gentlelady from Ohio is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I stand here first to salute those who advocate against domestic violence and those who advocate for more stroke awareness, health care issues. I also stand here not only as a member of Congress, but as a person who has navigated the online health care insurance marketplace system. So let me note some facts. Yes, there have been problems. Unfortunately, the website was not prepared to handle the huge volume of interest. But President Obama has made it clear that the delays on the website are unacceptable and they will be fixed. Since the marketplace has opened, healthcare.gov has had over 20 million unique visitors. Yes, 20 million. And while the site is being improved, consumers should keep in mind what we haven't heard from my colleagues, that there are 4 ways they can apply for coverage: by phone, online, by mail, and with a paper application, or with the help of an in-person assister. So I say to you, let us not forget the points that millions of Americans are now able to choose an insurance plan that will make the most sense for them and for their families. I yield back.
Gentlelady's time has expired. What purpose does the gentlelady from New Mexico seek recognition? Gentlelady is recognized for 1 minute.
All the way down. Mr. Speaker, I rise today to honor and thank the brave men and women in law enforcement who risk their lives every day to keep us safe. In the past week alone, 7 law enforcement officials in New Mexico have been shot and wounded. It's a pattern of senseless violence that's become all too familiar in this nation. On Saturday in Albuquerque, a man armed with an assault rifle and a bulletproof vest ambushed officers, stole a police cruiser, and led them on a dangerous chase. 3 Albuquerque police officers and a Bernalillo County Sheriff's deputy were shot. Thankfully, they are all expected to make a full recovery. But from that terrifying situation, stories of immense heroism and courage emerged. Officers sprang into action to resolve the situation quickly, prevent more harm, and help their brothers and sisters who had been shot. Firefighters from a nearby station ran into danger to help the injured. And New Mexicans have stepped up to donate thousands of dollars to help the officers and their families during this difficult time. To the first responders in New Mexico and all over the nation, from the bottom of our hearts, thank you. I yield back.
Gentlelady yields back her time. What purpose does the gentleman from Pennsylvania seek recognition?
I seek unanimous consent to address the House for 1 minute.
The gentleman from Pennsylvania is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. We have a couple of things going on today, Mr. Speaker. Number one, the House will be discharged at the end of the day to go back to a district work period. And we know what we're going to hear at home. What we're going to hear is, why can't you people do your jobs? Why can't you get together and come together and come up with a budget so that American business people can plan, so that Americans can decide what to do with their futures, instead of doing what's been happening for years on end, these continuing resolutions, things like the sequester. The sequester alone is going to cost 1 million jobs next year in this country if we don't replace it. The other thing that's going on today is the opening of the work of the Conference Committee on the Budget. 29 senators and representatives from this House getting together and trying to do just that, come up with a budget, come up with something sensible, forge the compromises that Americans expect us to reach, and I say let us speed them on their work. Good luck to them, and let's hope they come up with something Americans can appreciate. I yield back.
Gentleman's time has expired. What purpose does the gentlelady from New York seek recognition? Gentlelady from New York is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I rise today to strongly urge my colleagues' support for the Early Childhood Education Professional Improvement Act, H.R. 3357, which I introduced earlier this week with Congressman Jared Polis. Our bill would establish a framework of incentives and standards for the much-needed education and development of pre-K teachers. Equality of opportunity cannot be achieved without ensuring that all American children have access to high-quality pre-K. By the age of 2, affluent children already know 30% more words than low-income children. And these disparities are then exacerbated when affluent children attend high-quality pre-Ks and poorer ones that don't even attend pre-K at all. Senior military leaders, budget wonks, economists, and education advocates all agree that pre-K reform is essential and necessary for a strong and prosperous America. Furthermore, it is the most cost-effective investment in education we can make. Let's do this now, and let's do this right. Let's work together for high-quality pre-K for our children. I yield back. Thank you.
The gentlelady yields back her time. Chair announces the Speaker's appointment pursuant to Section 4B of House Resolution 5, 113th Congress, and the order of the House on January the 3rd, 2013, the following members to the House Democracy Partnership.
Mr. Roscom of Illinois, Chairman. Messrs. Fortenberry of Nebraska, Bustani of Louisiana, Conaway of Texas, Buchanan of Florida, Crenshaw of Florida, Wilson of South Carolina, Mrs. Brooks of Indiana, Mr. Latham of Iowa, Mrs. Black of Tennessee, and Mr. Ribble of Wisconsin.
The Chair announces the Speaker's appointment pursuant to 22 U.S.C. 3003 and the order of the House on January the 3rd, 2013, of the following members on the part of the House to be commissioned on the security and cooperation in Europe.
Messrs. Pitts of Pennsylvania, Aderholt of Alabama, Gingrey of Georgia, and Burgess of Texas.
What purpose does the gentleman from Texas seek recognition?
Mr. Speaker, pursuant to House Resolution 391, I call up H.R. 992, the SWAP's Regulatory Improvement Act, and ask for its immediate consideration.
The clerk will report the title of the bill.
Union Calendar Number 169, H.R. 992, a bill to amend provisions in Section 716 of the Dodd-Frank Wall Street Reform and Consumer Protection Act relating to federal assistance for SWAP's entities.
Pursuant to House Resolution 391, the bill is considered read. The bill shall be debatable for 1 hour, equally divided and controlled by the chair and ranking minority member of the Committee on Agriculture and the chair and ranking minority member of the Committee on Financial Services. The gentleman from Texas, Mr. Conaway, and the gentleman from Minnesota, Mr. Peterson, the gentleman from Texas, Mr. Hensarling, and the gentlewoman from California, Ms. Waters, each will control 15 minutes. The chair recognizes the gentleman from Texas, Mr. Hensarling.
Mr. Speaker, I ask unanimous consent that all members may have 5 legislative days within which to revise and extend their remarks and include extraneous material in the record on H.R. 992 currently under consideration.
Without objection.
Mr. Speaker, I yield myself 4 minutes.
The gentleman is recognized for 4 minutes.
Mr. Speaker, America's economy remains stuck in the slowest, weakest, non-recovery recovery of modern times. Millions of our fellow countrymen remain unemployed, underemployed. Many, because of Obamacare, have just had their hours cut. Millions lay awake at night wondering how they'll make ends meet. Regrettably, those who create jobs in America for our constituents are drowning in a sea of red tape, which is preventing them from hiring new workers. I still vividly remember the day when one of my constituents in East Texas came to me as he shut down his small business due to red tape and said, "Congressman, it got to the point where I just thought my government didn't want me to succeed." Well, Mr. Speaker, today we have an opportunity to ensure that businesses succeed in America, succeed in hiring new workers. Today, just like yesterday, Mr. Speaker, Republicans and Democrats can again pass bipartisan legislation that will help grow our economy. This legislation is H.R. 992, and I commend the bipartisan group of members who introduced the bill, Mr. Holtgren, Mr. Himes, Mr. Hudson, and Mr. Maloney. As chairman of the Financial Services Committee, I also want to thank the members of the committee who joined together and approved this bill on an overwhelmingly bipartisan vote of 53 to 6. Again, Mr. Speaker, the vote was 53 to 6. This bipartisan bill will relieve manufacturers, farmers, ranchers, and Main Street businesses of unintended consequences of one section of the Dodd-Frank Act. Now, many Americans may not realize it, but farmers, ranchers, manufacturers, and other employees use a financial product called a derivative to manage risk and protect themselves from extreme fluctuations in the price of things like fuel, fertilizer, and commodities. For example, a company like John Deere will do an interest rate swap as they finance a tractor for a farmer in East Texas in my district. And that derivative is directly linked to the cost of that tractor for my constituent. Companies like Southwest Airlines, who operate in my hometown of Dallas, Texas, they'll use derivatives to lock in cheaper fuel prices when the price of crude oil is on the rise. This keeps the cost of flying more affordable for customers, like the grandmother in Mesquite, Texas, who travels to visit her grandchildren in Kansas City. Perhaps a farmer's co-op in Nebraska will use derivatives to finance fixed-price diesel for truckers who haul cattle. Or perhaps a hospital in Los Angeles may use derivatives to hedge against the rising interest rates when financing a big investment, like more beds or new life-saving technology. And although not one single hospital, not patient, not one single farmer, not one single grandmother, not one single trucker caused the financial crisis, they were all swept in to Section 716 of Dodd-Frank. Section 716 requires financial institutions to push out almost all of their derivatives business into separate entities. This not only increases transaction cost, which are ultimately paid by the consumers. It also makes our financial system less secure by forcing swap trading out of regulated institutions. In fact, Mr. Speaker, Federal Reserve Chairman Bill Bernanke said Section 716, quote, would make the U.S. financial system less resilient, weaken our financial stability, and make our economy more susceptible to systemic risk. And those who are loath to ever amend Dodd-Frank know less of an authority than Barney Frank himself, former chairman of the committee, said, quote, it addresses the valid criticisms of Section 716 without weakening the financial reform law's important derivative safeguards or prohibitions on bank proprietary trading. So again, Mr. Speaker, no law is perfect. We would be derelict in our duty if we didn't put the American people back to work and pass this law.
Gentleman reserves his time.
Reserve.
Gentlelady from California is recognized.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. I yield to the gentleman from Minnesota, Representative Colin Peterson, the ranking member of the Committee on Agriculture, 4 minutes.
Gentleman is recognized for 4 minutes.
Thank the gentlelady. I rise in strong opposition to H.R. 992, commonly known as the swap push-out bill. This bill would effectively gut important financial reforms and put taxpayers potentially on the hook for big banks' risky behavior. In 2008, I voted against the TARP because I didn't think the federal government should be bailing out the mess both regular banks, so-called investment banks like Goldman Sachs, got themselves into with derivatives trading. Section 716 of the Dodd-Frank law ensures that hopefully we won't find ourselves in that situation again. The provision is a modest measure designed to prevent the federal government from bailing out or subsidizing bank activity that is not related to the business of banking. Originally, Section 716, a Senate provision, would have forced banks to spin all of their swap activity into a separate affiliate. The House version of Dodd-Frank had no such requirement. In a compromise, the final version of Section 716 allows the banks to hold on to swaps for hedging purposes and swaps related to the business of banking, primarily interest rate swaps and foreign exchange swaps. Under Dodd-Frank, banks are required to move commodity swaps, including energy and agriculture swaps, non-cleared, non-investment grade credit default swaps on asset-backed securities, and equity swaps to a separate affiliate. This represents barely 10% of the world of the swap market. So banks can keep 90% in the bank. But apparently this isn't good enough for some of these big banks, which is why we're here today with H.R. 992, trying to gut the Dodd-Frank provisions and keep playing in 99% of the swap market, which is pretty much the status quo. H.R. 992 also makes it easier for banks to hide commodity manipulation from regulators. In recent months, we have seen J.P. Morgan charged with settling cases of alleged energy market manipulation and the start of an investigation of Goldman Sachs for aluminum manipulation. The Federal Reserve is even reconsidering its decision letting banks get involved with owning commodities. Until the big banks are held accountable for the activities in the commodity swaps market, I am reluctant to repeal limits Congress already has put in place. Since the passage of Dodd-Frank, it is clear that Wall Street has not learned its lesson. The loss experienced by J.P. Morgan through derivative trading in the London Whale incident is proof of that. At some point, another bank is going to find itself in similar trouble and run to the government with its hands out for assistance. And frankly, I think the American people are sick and tired of the banks asking for taxpayer help when they get in trouble from risky trading activities. In the past, I've joined our Democratic Agriculture Committee members in support of legislation to change Dodd-Frank, and I've supported those efforts because those bills reaffirmed what Congress intended with the original law, like protecting derivative end users. Well, these end users also share my concerns. The Commodity Markets Oversight Coalition, representing commodity-dependent industries, businesses, and end users that rely on functional, transparent, competitive commodity derivative markets as a hedge and price discovery tool, they also oppose H.R. 992. H.R. 992 repeals a key, if modest, reform component of Dodd-Frank. And my opponents are certainly free to vote as they wish, but I urge them to be careful, because people will remember this vote. And I urge my colleagues, if they're smart, to oppose H.R. 992 so we don't put our taxpayer dollars at risk for bank swap activity that are not related to their banking business. And yield back.
Gentleman yields back. The gentlelady from California reserves. Gentleman from Texas, Mr. Henseling.
Mr. Speaker, I am very pleased now to yield 4 minutes to the chief Republican sponsor of the SWAP's Regulatory Improvement Act, which again passed our committee on a strong bipartisan basis of 53-6. I would like to yield 4 minutes to the gentleman from Illinois, Mr. Holmgren.
The gentleman from Illinois is recognized for 4 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Speaker, I come to the floor today with tremendous pride, not because the bill we're debating is my own, but because we have the chance to help Main Street businesses and roll back one of the unintended consequences of Dodd-Frank. From its first edition, the Lincoln Amendment, also called the SWAP's push-out or spin-off provision, has been hotly debated. Section 716 of Dodd-Frank initially prohibited all swaps activities. However, the conference process yielded some measure of compromise by exempting foreign exchange and interest rate swaps back in. By doing this, the conferees acknowledged that swaps are not inherently destructive. In fact, swaps are a prudent and necessary activity for many businesses. When oil prices spike or corn prices plummet, farmers and manufacturers rely on financial products like swaps to weather the uncertainty. And many of these businesses use banks as counterparties, where they have long-standing relationships with trusted institutions. Limiting banks' ability to serve their customers will cost these customers more as they are forced to find new, less stable partners. Section 716, as it stands now, would force certain swaps out of federal prudential regulator supervision and push them into affiliated entities that are not subject to the same oversight and regulation. This is why some of the loudest critics of the push-out provision have been federal regulators, like the Federal Reserve Chairman Bernanke and Paul Volcker. I know Ranking Member Waters and many members of the House from both sides of the aisle share these concerns. Moving swaps out of banks, while intended to reduce risk, may actually increase it. This is one of the reasons I introduced H.R. 992. The Swaps Regulatory Improvement Act leaves the most opaque swaps spun off to affiliates, the kind of swaps that exacerbated the 2008 crisis. Those are still forced out. However, banks will be allowed to provide other types of swap contracts to their customers, such as equity, credit, and commodity swaps, which are very important to my home state, Illinois. All of these activities are subject to the new swaps regime created by Title VII, including reporting and registration requirements, clearing, margin, and business conduct standards. These activities would also be subject to a finalized Volcker rule, meaning they would generally be for legitimate hedging purposes or client-facing, not proprietary. In the committee report from last Congress, former Chairman Barney Frank, Ranking Member Waters, and other minority members of the committee noted that this bill, and I quote, addresses the valid criticisms of Section 716 without weakening the financial reform law's important derivative safeguards or prohibitions on bank proprietary trading, end quote. This is every bit as true of the bill we are considering today as it was in the last Congress. H.R. 992 addresses the valid criticisms of Section 716. And I quote, concerns about whether pushing swaps out of banks is the best way to mitigate against future systemic risk, to quote Ranking Member Waters. This bill strengthens regulatory oversight of these products. H.R. 992 does not weaken Title VII's derivative safeguards or the prohibition on bank proprietary trading. H.R. 992 will keep costs lower for Main Street businesses that use swaps to hedge risks. And 992 will help prevent derivatives market displacement and help promote U.S. competitiveness. This bill addresses nonpartisan concerns with a bipartisan solution. I thank my Democratic colleagues for being willing to consider targeted fixes to Dodd-Frank. We can find common ground on financial regulation. We can work together for the American people. And we can fix Dodd-Frank without dismantling its important accomplishments. And so I ask my colleagues to support this bill. Talk to your hospitals, bankers, and farmers. They will tell you that swaps are an important common business tool. And forcing higher costs on these transactions will only stifle job creation and economic growth. H.R. 992 is a sound bill and strikes, in the words of Ranking Member Waters, the right balance. I yield back.
Gentleman yields back his time. The gentleman from Texas reserves. Gentlelady from California is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I yield to myself as much time as I may need.
Gentlelady from California is recognized.
The financial crisis of 2008 wreaked untold havoc on the U.S. economy. This disaster, which was intensified by the use of derivatives, set back hard-working Americans for generations. At the same time, it bailed out many of the nation's largest banks. The Dodd-Frank Act sought to put our financial markets back together by, for example, creating comprehensive oversight and reforms for derivatives markets, as well as prohibitions on banks betting with taxpayers' resources. H.R. 992 would undo some of these reforms before our regulators, Wall Street cops, have a chance to finish them, especially the Volcker Rule. Congress passed the Volcker Rule to stop banks from using customer deposits backed by the taxpayer for trades intended to only benefit the bank and not its customers. The rule, when finalized, will define legitimate bank activities like hedging and market making, but prevent other behavior that would leave the taxpayer and the economy hurting. In the same vein, Congress passed the Lincoln Amendment, the provision that H.R. 992 would gut, to insulate the taxpayer by pushing out certain derivatives from the insured bank, while also making broad exceptions for swaps that bank customers overwhelmingly use. The Bipartisan Policy Center also recognized the connection between the Volcker Rule and the Lincoln Amendment, noting that a well-executed Volcker Rule would simultaneously accomplish the intended goal of the Lincoln Amendment. And in case America forgot, J.P. Morgan reminded all of us of the importance of setting limits on bank activity. In 2012, 4 years after the crisis, J.P. Morgan's Chase London Well caused the bank to lose more than $6 billion in a few months. What were purportedly hedges using complicated derivatives transactions were later transformed by the bank's focus on profit into what would likely be banned under Volcker. The sense of urgency of separating the taxpayer-supported bank from the investment bank is shared across the aisle. Let me just tell you, in March of this year, Representative Zeb Hinterland said that, and I quote, "Certainly, we have to do a better job ring-fencing, firewalling, whatever metaphor you want to use, between an insured depository institution and a non-insured investment bank," quote unquote. And yet, 3 years after the passage of Dodd-Frank and 5 years after the financial crisis, we still do not have a ban on the very behavior that hurt our economy. Instead, H.R. 992 eliminates one taxpayer protection, the Lincoln Amendment, by now allowing banks to engage in 99% of the swaps market without the taxpayer knowing how robust the monitoring and oversight of such activities will be. Mr. Speaker, H.R. 992 is a step backwards, backwards toward repairing our economy. This view is shared by the Commodity Markets Oversight Coalition, a nonpartisan alliance of American industries, businesses, consumers, and derivatives users. Similarly, the White House, the AFL-CIO, CalPERS, the Teamsters, Public Citizen, and Americans for Financial Reform all strongly oppose H.R. 992. Former Republican chairman of the FDIC, Sheila Bair, who strongly defended taxpayers during the crisis, noted immediately after the Financial Services Committee's passed H.R. 992. She said, and I quote, "Repeal of Section 716 moves in the wrong direction. In an area as complex as this, I just wish Congress would at least wait for the regulators." I do too. Vote no on H.R. 992. Mr. Chairman, I reserve the balance of my time.
Gentlelady from California reserves. Gentleman from Texas, Mr. Hensarling.
Mr. Speaker, at this time I'm happy to yield 1 minute to the gentleman from Florida, Mr. Crenshaw.
Gentleman from Florida is recognized. 1 minute.
Thank the gentleman for yielding. And let me just simply say, as chairman of the Appropriations Subcommittee on Financial Services and General Government,
My subcommittee has oversight over the SEC and is charged with funding the SEC, and their budget's increased about 200% over the last 10 years. That's more than most agencies. That's a lot of money. And a lot of that is caused by all the rules and regulations that they're asked to pass over and over again. Dodd-Frank is part of that problem. And I think this bill seeks to alleviate that problem by saying, look, we can protect investors, we can have orderly and fair capital markets, but we don't need to go overboard on the regulation. Certainly derivatives are complicated financial instruments. They need regulation, but that's what this bill provides. And I would say that the great majority of derivatives, the great overwhelming majority, are not responsible for the financial crisis. So we passed this legislation. We can help save those people that use these instruments. We can also help the SEC not have to draft so many unnecessary rules and regulations. That'll save taxpayers as well. Yield back my time.
Gentleman yields back. Gentleman from Texas reserves. Gentlelady from California.
Thank you very much. I yield to the gentleman from Minnesota, Mr. Ellis. Oh, I thought he was next. Oh, I'm sorry.